Morning, Daen. Thank you very much for having me here at Black Lab, and welcome to AU Manufacturing Conversations.
Thanks for coming.
A pleasure. So the first question is always, how did you get here and what do you make?
How did I get here? My entry into this industry was interesting. I studied industrial design at university. Technically, though, I'm 100% unqualified because I never finished my university degree. I got reasonably sick with glandular fever, and as a result of that, just traffic transport university, that sort of didn't work. So I went back out into industry to earn a bit of income and ended up working in IT for a while, just in service and maintenance, but very quickly transitioned into their sales team. You'll start to see a bit of a repetition of behaviour happen over the time. Did that for a while until really, I knew it kind of wasn't for me. I wanted to get back into designing, solving problems, engineering, that sort of stuff. So I reached out to, at the time, the Australian reseller of SolidWorks and decided to do some personalised training. Or really what I did is I looked at industry and I looked at skills that people wanted. And they were really looking, it was really as we were starting to get our head around 3D parametric CAD and how much that was starting to change industry. So I went and got myself trained in SolidWorks through the software distributor in Australia. And as a result of that, managed to get my first job working for a company in packaging machinery down in Mobile called Precision Dynamics. Mm-hmm. That company was good, but really it was run by an older gentleman, and he was kind of coming out of his career. He wasn't really innovating and growing, and I'm like, I don't really, see myself being here forever. So, kind of what's next. So I went back to the company that I'd done the training with and, asked them what other opportunities they might have known about. And a couple of hours later, they called me back and said, well, why don't you come up here for an interview to become an applications engineer and a trainer for SolidWorks? So I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. Went back up and I did that for a number of years. But again, similar to IT, I transitioned out of the technical side of it and into the sales. And before long, I was a sales engineer selling the software, not training and teaching people how to use it. But kind of ended up back at this position of, well, this isn't really for me. I like to design and solve problems. So I kind of bought my own license of SolidWorks and left into CAD to kind of go and do my own thing. And it was my first own business, I should say. And I was just a contractor or a CAD jockey with a laptop, would go around to different companies, helping them design product. What I found really hard then, though, was as a reasonably young designer, I was trying to get myself to be familiar with, modern manufacturing techniques, and started knocking on doors. And I'm like, can you teach me about your equipment? And everyone...
Sorry, this is modern manufacturing techniques in the
probably
2000s?
No, probably late 2000s, probably 2010, okay. Sort of, probably 15-ish years ago, something like that. Learning about laser cutting, learning about CNC brake presses, learning about, more about CNC machines. What are their limitations? What are their capabilities? How do I design efficiently for them? If you give me a quote for getting a product made, what subtle changes can I make to my design to get big impact on the value of the products that I'm delivering? And really, I got doors slammed in my face left, right and centre of why do we want to talk to, a young designer about these sorts of topics. So the next bit is kind of where the history started, where through some contacts that I'd made in Intercad, I had a very confident competent fabricator called Mike Faber, and was sitting there over a few beers talking about how good it would be if we could get some equipment and really jump out into industry and kind of show people what's possible. So we got together and went and managed to borrow a whole heap of money, partly with the help of my father-in-law, but borrow a whole heap of money and go and buy a laser cutter and a brake press. Thinking about it now, and a lot of comments that were made to us at the time, we kind of go back and go, what were we thinking? But we managed to make it work.
I read somewhere it was about 2 million in hock you were.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah. So, and it's kind of interesting. It's about $1.5 million in machinery or equipment, but then the extra $500,000 comes around very quickly in getting it all wired up, and then you need a compressor, and then all of a sudden you get sheet turning up, so you need a forklift unloaded off the truck, and then, you know, pallets, and then wrapping, and then palleting equipment, and then computers to run it, and, you know, that 2 million probably turns, you know, it grew and grew, like the whole business has grown and grown over the years. So anyway, we got into it and we learnt a lot very quickly. Biggest lesson we really learnt early was, as much as we wanted to be really inspirational and really push the boundaries on what we could do with this equipment, we really just needed to get money through the door to pay the bills. And the money coming in through the doors, you know, to pay the bills really became the pressure that in some aspects stifles innovation. Because you're choosing the job that you're going to get paid for as opposed to the real interesting one. But the lessons that I guess I've taken out of, you know, that initial phase is that you can actually do both. You've just got to be a little bit, you know, you've got to question it early, and you've got to, you know, kind of back yourself on your knowledge of what's happening to know that you can get something across the line. You might have never done it before, but, you know, the principles of what you're trying to achieve, you know that you can get to a result. And sometimes, you know, promise something that you're not 100% confident that you're going to be able to deliver, and then figure it out.
Right. Well, let's talk about innovation, I guess you'd call it later. Before we get there, tell me about, you mentioned the early days of the company, mostly sheet metal based sort of a business. How did you transition into some of the other things you're doing? What's the process?
So what really came in is it's the same learning curve that had happened with sheet metal when we started the business. It was about this knowledge. Because we were so good at solving problems and turning around high quality sheet metal componentry, the question came, can you powder coat it? We're like, okay. So we started working with powder coaters early on. One of the original founders, Mike Faber, his family had a powder coating business, or still has a powder coating business out in Narrabri. We found that it was the most reliable, highest quality powder coating that we could find in close proximity, or not in close proximity, but that was consistently available. So we bought a truck and we started driving product from the Northern Beaches all the way out to Narrabri. They would powder coat it over the weekend. We'd chuck it back on the truck and bring it all the way back to Sydney. And that's how we got our first few really big projects across the line. Then it really came down to how we solved transport issues, damage that you get, you know, that whole logistics exercise. So hence we eventually looked around and put our own powder coating facility in. But the site that we originally had in Cromer didn't have enough space for that powder coating facility, so it went into another venue. So we still had a transport problem, but it was a closer one, and we could handle and control the powder coating ourselves. So the next kind of phase happened around, you know, consolidation and bringing everything under one roof. So we did that about 6 years ago up into Frenchs Forest, and, you know, that's where the head office is now. The next, I guess, when you ask those questions about how we get into the rest of the areas, is it really came from the next person coming, we've got this metal componentry, but it's got a bit of plastic, or it's got a piece of timber, or it's got a printed graphic. And over the years, we've just slowly acquired the different skill sets in-house, not because it's not available elsewhere, but because we really concentrate on a timeline and a delivery. We take out the complexity of freight by having it all under one roof. We take out the complexity of fitting into someone else's schedule because we do it all ourselves. So it's meant that we've been able to turn around mass volumes of products in very, very short lead times. So in ordinance of 4,500 hand sanitizers during COVID in 18 days.
Yep. It's one of your trophy jobs, I guess, and rightly so, you're quite proud of it. So I guess let's go a little, before we go much further into anything else, we've talked about what you make in sort of abstract terms, except for that one example just then. Tell me a little bit more about products you're churning out here, you're getting built, and if you can be a contract manufacturer, you can't always, but if you can, who your customers are.
I think a thing for us is we have a lot of very capable equipment that could suit a number of different industries. For business continuity and stability, I've always tried to not pigeonhole ourselves into one specific industry, but we build product for retailers, or for supermarkets. We've done checkouts. We did a lot of COVID response products, which was social distancing screens and sanitizers. But we've also built a lot of point of sale displays, both temporary and very permanent. We've spent a lot of time in digital signage and outdoor advertising. We've built street furniture for companies like bus shelters and picnic tables, that sort of equipment. We also work on some big infrastructure projects. We've done building facades, both internally and externally. Great example of one of those was a facade for ultimately Gina Reinhardt for a dairy, but that was in conjunction with a company called Denmark over in Western Australia. It was about 2,500 unique facade panels, creating a quite amazing geometric sculpture of a roof facade, right through to service and maintenance access floorings for water treatment plants. In that particular project, we processed about 40 tonne of aluminium through routers and lasers and the brake presses, and it wasn't a powder coated job, but it had its own unique problems to solve, working with aluminium tread plate and hinges, and how you counterbore so you have flush hinges so that they don't become tripping hazards in access equipment.
Understood, right. And you've mentioned a lot of design considerations there, and they're all important, and that's, I guess, why you get the jobs. And one thing I wanted to draw towards, I'm not sure how to get from here to there, but the next thing I'd like to ask about is your definition of advanced manufacturing. I quite liked it. There's smart ways to make dumb things, and to somebody who has just hears some of the names of some of the products you just mentioned might think, oh, these aren't IoT devices or nanomaterials or particularly advanced manufacturing goods. I would say, shut up, you're wrong. That's very uncharitable, and you should think a little harder about what you're saying. But I would like to hear, my opinion's not interesting here. What is interesting, is yours. And tell me about your thoughts on advanced manufacturing and smart ways to make dumb things.
I think that's that is a very good point, and I'm very passionate about talking that not everybody in the world can solve the next big technical innovation. There is definitely smart things to make in this world, and you've mentioned IoT, and we do dabble in it, but the reality is, the biggest impact that we can make on society, the biggest impact we can make on Australian manufacturing is realizing that there's stuff that we need to use and consume and work with every single day. And the challenge is, how do we get better or smarter at making that stuff so that we can compete on a global stage in Australia, as opposed to worrying about, Australian manufactured for Australian people. When do we start talking about Australian manufactured for the world? When do we, look at, and we look at what's happened with the car industry in Australia, what's going to come and fill its gap? What are we going to get really good at presenting to the rest of the world? And it's not a tech space. Like, the world is full of people that need knives, forks, screws, hinges, tables, seats. They're things that they interact with more on a daily basis than even your phone. Shoes, clothes, all of this sort of stuff that Australia, has been historically very good at making. How do we get smarter at making those things? Yeah. That's where I really think about what does advanced manufacturing look like in Australia.
Good point. I think I've heard the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre say that one of their slogans is, it's not what you make but how you make it, and I think that's more or less your line of thinking. And so to go a little further with advanced manufacturing, I have mixed feelings about the term. I like the idea that every manufacturer should aspire to, smarten up what they're doing, and whatever they're making, the nature of it's not important. They should make it as competitively and as efficiently as possible, because that's just no-brainer stuff. I get a bit annoyed at buzzwords like, sometimes nowadays you see a minister as the advanced manufacturing minister, and I just think, well, why aren't you the manufacturing minister or the industry minister? Why are you does that mean you're not the minister for manufacturing that's less than advanced? I just think sometimes these terms exclude people as well as they present a positive idea. Do you have any sort of manufacturing buzzwords like advanced manufacturing or smart manufacturing or anything like that you think, okay, that's the flavour of the month and it really irks me?
I think that, I think advanced manufacturing, I've seen so many people talk about additive manufacturing or 3D printers, when I've had companies come and talk to me and walk through the factory and go, well, when are you going to get into 3D printing? And I think that has actually been the one that has irked me the most, because absolutely additive manufacturing has a place, but it's such a small component of what is going on in innovation in manufacturing. The other thing I think that irks me a lot is that, and people are trying to deal with this stigmatism at the moment, that advanced manufacturing means job loss. That when you talk about advanced manufacturing, it means that your automation is a replacement for people. If you look around at the moment, there's a people shortage. People are really struggling to get skilled labourers. I think if I look at what I think is important when we think about advanced manufacturing, I think about fatigue management. I think about how can we work with cobots as opposed to robots to work with a welder to leverage a welder's skill and ability, but manage his fatigue so that he can work in his career for longer. They're the things that I think are important to consider, is how is advanced manufacturing assisting us in what we're doing as opposed to changing it.
Yep. Nice. Well, you mentioned two bits of technology there: additive manufacturing, collaborative robots. I think collaborative robots, you put them in a term where, in a sense where that is answering a problem that exists, fatigue. And additive manufacturing can be useful for any number of things, but it's often can be hammer looking for a nail. I think that the most important thing is meeting a need that exists rather than being in love with technology for the sake of it.
Yeah, I think that, one of the biggest things that I see about, additive manufacturing or 3D printing, for instance, is it's fantastic at building tools and jigs to hold stuff to help you do better work on that done product.
Yep.
Okay. To create consistency, and again, things like fatigue management or repeatability or quality, because you can check it. It's little things like 3D printing, tolerance devices. So you're checking a part that's going through to make sure that it's compliant because it sits in the same 3D printed jig every single time. That's where I think people have this vision that all of a sudden you're going to have a printer like you did when word processing came out and it sent bubble jet printers through the roof, that all of a sudden every house is going to have a 3D printer in their house and they're not going to go to the store anymore. The reality is that you can't automate the design process like you can in a document creation. It's just more complicated. Maybe one day, but I think it's a long way away. So I think that from that additive manufacturing, it's how people are, really thinking about how it's useful, and how they're going to use it in their lives. And I think like the collaborative robot stuff, there's just things that as humans, and I don't consider myself old at all, but I know that my body is starting to fall apart now. And I really considered myself a hero when I was 10 years younger than I am today, and I can't do it anymore. And the more that we can help people entering their trades now, maintain their body, there is definitely a skill when I look at my fabricators and the guys that, my fabricators, my woodworkers, my tradesmen, my powder coating guys. There's stuff that we can do in the way that our brain processes that we're never going to be able to do with automation. I once heard something about automation that I thought was amazing, or when one of the best things about robotic automation is it does exactly what you ask it to do. One of the worst things of robotic automation is that it does exactly what you ask it to do.
Yep.
I once heard a guy say that the biggest lesson he learned in life was that he put a robot in because he was trying to figure out how to scale his business. And he tried and persisted for 6 months and went, this isn't working. So he went and put on his first employee. And he said what was absolutely amazing about putting his first employee on was all of a sudden his factory was voice activated. So when we're talking about advanced manufacturing, we spend our whole lives trying to make a robot voice activated when we have employees that already are. If you spent the same time and energy on advancing your employees for advanced manufacturing, what would the results look like?
Yeah, it's a fine point. So let's change gears a tiny bit, because as much as I enjoyed what you just said, we don't have all day to get through this list of things I've got in front of me. Let's perhaps talk about R&D, and if you're able to talk about some of the things you showed me earlier that were emulating the look of wood and meeting some sustainability needs. Probably can't talk about who they were for, but if you can go into that project and related ones, please, that'd be good.
I think a big thing at the moment is, we're all talking about the circularist economy. We are looking at, sustainability across the board. One thing I like to constantly remind people when sustainability comes up is one of the most recycled products on this world is steel, and people forget about it. People start going to look for products that are environmentally friendly equivalents of plastics and timbers and things like that, and are trying to recreate plastic that's made out of starch so that it disintegrates back into the ground. But if we go back and look at products that used to be packaged in tins that are now packaged in plastic containers that could probably go back to being packaged in tins because it's a full circulus recycled product. Goes back into a mill, can get turned back into a tin container. So that's just one comment that I want to make at the front of that. But in saying that, what we're trying to do or work with is, again, the benefit is that it's environmentally friendly, or it's made out of 80% recycled product, and it's 100% recyclable. But the reality is the problem that we're actually trying to solve is supply chain and lead time. So if we're working with naturally milled timbers in Australia, things like Tasmanian oak, it's got a forestry component. Okay, you don't want to overcut your demand. So they're working to a schedule as trees are growing in a sustainable pattern. They then need to cut the trees down, mill them, and then kill them, dry them, and that has a lead time. So with the disruption that's been happening from health factors like COVID at the moment, we aren't able to predictably plan as far ahead as we used to, because we're trying to predict labour, we're trying to get everybody on. So our lead times for requiring raw materials is becoming less. So how do we kind of consolidate what our materials are whilst still maintaining authenticity of the environments we're in? So as a result of that, we're using high quality UV printing to replicate textures like Tasmanian oak, so that we can do cost-effective, sustainable, and quickly deployable materials into industries that require volume of product at short lead times.
Yep. Let's skip to marketing, because you guys have, you take marketing seriously, and I think more manufacturers should. If I can editorialize for a moment, there are various reasons why they fail at the task, and we could pick a number of them. Scale is a big one, but there are others too. There's the humble Aussie culture thing, I think, that plays a role. There are others too, but we don't need to go too much further into what they are. Let's just talk about marketing, how you're using it in your company, why you've chosen the focus you have, and what lessons made you think this is something that I should give a hoot about.
I think that there's 3 points that I really want to illustrate in that. The first one is I've spent my whole life with the concept of shameless self-promotion. Nobody else is going to promote you, so you have to do it yourself. The second side of, that kind of really follows on from that, and to quote Gary Vaynerchuk, is it's not what you know and it's not who you know, it's who knows you. So if you're not getting out there in the market and you're complaining about your sales pipeline, or you're complaining about the fact that you've got no orders, well, who knows what you can do, and who you are and what your capabilities are. You have to get out in the world and tell people about it. And then the third thing is really, when I started the business, and one of the things that I try, if I link it back to innovation, is what businesses are being innovative out there, and what are they doing, and how can we take stuff from those industries and bring them, because it works in fashion, why can't it work in manufacturing? Because it works in, hospitality, why can't it work in manufacturing? When you look at the, industries that get great marketing presence or social media presence, manufacturing is undershot. There isn't enough people out there. And what I think is absolutely amazing is it's really interesting watching what content we produce gets attention. And it's not necessarily machines doing jobs. It's people doing jobs. It's people doing cool things, and the education side that comes around with marketing, and that's educating people about what we can do so more people know about us to come and tell us when they've got a problem, and then we can see if we can help.
Right. And so how did you develop this approach? You're doing a weekly newsletter, which I rather like, and I like that it's Billy's Business Insights and that you have a company mascot, but that's another story. How did you come up with the idea of regular newsletters, to spend a bit of time on LinkedIn as you appear to? Well, how did you find out what works, basically?
I think that the biggest thing about it is there's no magic formula about what's going to work. What you need to do is you need to go and try something and measure it, and then look at improving it, and then measure it. And it's looking at the results from the activity that you do that points you in the right direction of what's working for you. So it's in some aspects a big part of marketing initially is a bit of spray and pray. So you've got to get into all of the areas, and you really need to concentrate on volume of content, because without doing the volume of content, you have nothing to measure. So you need to really think about, how you get your cadence up, and keep it consistent. So, you mentioned weekly newsletters. The importance of the weekly newsletter is people get into a habit. We are all habit-driven creatures of expecting it once a week. So it does two things. People either look forward to it or not. But if it doesn't come out, it can break routine. So, but it's also a gentle reminder that we're still here. There's, if I can't think of his name at the moment, but there's a marketing guy that talked about at any one time, 3% of the population is looking at the services that you're providing. So you need to make sure that you're there when that 3% is ready. Okay, so you've got to be talking to 100 people to get 3 people all of the time. And then next month, you got to talk to the same 100 people, because it's probably going to be a different 3 people that are potentially going to be buying or working with. So I think if I was going to say anything to anybody out there about spending more time and energy on marketing, is the reality is, for a business owner or a sole person that's working in it, is the sales and marketing component of their business should be 1/3 of their weekly activity.
Okay. I'd be surprised if very many manufacturers spend that amount.
I would say that there is very, very, very few people that are putting 1/3 of their energy into sales and marketing. But yeah, it's when you talk about business insights, you talk about things like the donkey wheel, and which is what most traditional small manufacturers go through, and that's they go get their first job. They do their first job. They concentrate really hard on delivering an excellent result. They get to the end of the job. They go, I don't have any money. So then they start chasing the money for the job that they just delivered. Can you pay me? Can you pay me? Can you pay me? Oh, we'll get to you. You're next in line. They get paid. Got money again. Cool. I've got nothing to do. There's no job. Okay, now I'll go and do the sales and marketing. I'll go on to get the next job. And this self-fulfilling wheel starts to happen of do the job, collect the money, pay the bills, go looking for the next job. Do the job, collect the money, pay the bills, go looking for the next job, and become cyclic. What you need to do is concentrate on, and when I talk about the thirds, is how do you overlap it? Because it's always going to be a cycle that you get the job, do the work, collect the money. How do you then get a job here so you can start a job there and collect the money here, and then get a job here so you can start a job here and do the job there, so that you've got 3 separate projects running simultaneously, overlapping each other to flatten your cash flow. And ultimately, that's why we spend time and energy on marketing, is to help the business grow and continue to exist. There's another thing that, if you looked at inflation over the years, and it's a very relevant point at the moment, is people get proud of being consistent, revenue year on year on year, the same. You know, they get to a point and they go, we plateau and we go. The reality is that if you're not growing a business and you're not getting bigger and better, you're actually dying, because someone else is coming in and will take over, because they're concentrating on growing and innovating and changing, and you will become old news at some point. But the reality is you've got to be growing your business by 5, 10, 20% every year just to stay relevant. Because otherwise you will find that the rest of the world or the rest of the environment has come past and taken over, and then you wonder where you were when you kind of said, I've made it now.
Right. And so, talking about growing a business and staying relevant, what are you looking at in terms of opportunities on the horizon? What do you think is the next big thing for you guys?
Unfortunately, I don't think the hard times are over. And I think that a real thing that everybody needs to be thinking about for the next few years at least is just survival. I do think that the next innovation wave is coming. But to be totally honest, I don't know that anybody knows what it is yet. I think if you look at the IT boom and you look at the Industrial Revolution, we're ready for whatever the next thing is. A lot of people say it's going to be something around artificial intelligence. And as a result, we're a manufacturer, but I have people on staff that are staying hyper aware of what's going on with artificial intelligence. We're looking at how we can put AI and artificial intelligence into dumb product.
Yep.
So that, we can again get insights on what they are. I think I've alluded to it before. I think that working on people to help achieve advanced manufacturing is extremely important. I think the focus of Australia and how we have been focusing on people, it's already starting to happen, because we've identified we've got a skilled shortage. That I think that heroing some of the incredible skills that you have in a factory and how important they are. A typical example of this is robotic welding. A robot doesn't know how to do the weld. It will keep doing exactly what you tell it to do over and over again, but you still need that welder that's extremely capable to teach that robot what to do. So we need to make sure that we're continuously training welders what good welds are. We need to make sure that, we are training tradesmen on how to make things, because it's what teaches them whether or not the machine is doing the right thing. It's interesting listening to, tradesmen that I have in the factory that can identify when a machine doesn't sound right. Where people that have just blindly programmed a machine and told it to do things aren't really aware when you can hear a bearing that needs greasing, or that the cutting speed on a router is too fast or too slow and it's screaming. Where tradesmen that have used saws and have pushed a router through a piece of timber understand that the resistance of the router and how hard their muscles have been when pushing it is influenced by the noise that the piece of equipment is making. So they know that they hear that noise and they go, okay, that machine's got to be sped up or slowed down, because they know that when they were cutting something by hand and they heard that noise, they would speed up or slow down intuitively to get a better result. I really think that that's the next phase of us consolidating on the knowledge with the people.
Yep. Right, so just a couple more questions because I've eaten up quite a bit of your day. Northern Beaches, I'm not asking you to justify why you live here. It's not my place to do that, but it's not, there are manufacturers in this part of the world, but not the same amount as, say, the southwest of Sydney. Why? Well, I guess I'm going to ask, why are you here?
To start off with, I always wanted to work in manufacturing, but I also wanted to live on the Northern Beaches. So I couldn't get a job in manufacturing on the Northern Beaches, so I had to start a manufacturer to be able to get a job in manufacturing on the Northern Beaches.
Bring the mountain to Muhammad.
Bring the mountain to Muhammad, yeah, totally. So that's probably how it started. What I discovered is even in advanced product and advanced manufacturing, there is still dumb and mediocre tasks. Loading a CNC machine, it's not a career aspiring or aspirational career path to be the person that picks something out of a bucket and puts it on a machine, or pulls it off a machine and puts it in a bucket. There's only so long that you can continue to do that task for before you want to do something else. So we've managed to leverage on the Northern Beaches a big part of the international procurement, the international team of people, or people that come here for a holiday and want to live here for 3 to 6 months before they move off to the next part of Australia or move on to their next holiday destination. So they come to us and they will work and they will be quite happy doing that mediocre task for 3 to 6 months so that they can earn enough money to continue holidaying. But when it becomes too mundane and they move off, it's no big loss for us because we know it's going to happen and we can get another international person to do that task. And it also means that we haven't put someone into a position for a lifelong career that's going to affect them from repetitive strain injury or, have mental health problems from, the task that they're actually doing. And the other side of it is the people that are doing those tasks are also extremely intelligent. So they're coming over here and they just want a job to earn a little bit of money whilst they're on holidays, but they're doctors, nurses, veterinarians, engineers, lawyers, accountants, and we've really leveraged that community. So that's probably why we've stayed. It's not why we started, but it's why we've stayed. That landscape is obviously changing at the moment with having less international backpackers and students and stuff coming to Australia, but we still have where we can, we still rely on that.
It's a pretty good arrangement. And one of the recurring questions of this series is why do you believe Australia needs a strong manufacturing ecosystem? What's that question throw up to you?
That's really a core thing to the success of the country is you kind of have these, tier 1, 2, and 3 productive environments where the first one is minerals and agriculture. So when we're looking at, mining raw materials, iron ore, bauxite, coal, uranium, that sort of stuff, that's a great income producing thing for us as a nation. we've obviously always had a history in agriculture, in farming, cotton, wool, those sorts of things. But the reality is we need to leverage what we have from those raw materials and increase their value before they leave the country. So, manufacturing is how we do that. It's how we take, a $2 piece of raw material and turn it into a $10 or $100 item to leave the country. And it makes, there's something for the nation to be proud of, because you've changed it and you've created something from nothing. But really, it also, from a global perspective, and I mentioned before about competing on a global stage, it also makes us self-reliant. Currently, I think our biggest problem that we've occurred at the moment, and it was noticeable most during COVID, was our reliance and lack of independence that has come around from letting such a large majority of our manufacturing go offshore.
Yep, good answer. And I would give you my 5 cents, but that's quite boring. I'll do that elsewhere. Lastly, is there anything that you'd like to plug?
Not really.
Okay. You're not obliged to if you don't want to.
No, I think I think education. I think everybody having a crack and getting involved. Don't be scared. I think when you think about the risks of starting your own business, look at where you are today, and when you start a business and realise that if it all goes pear-shaped, that's probably where you'll end up. That'll be the worst that'll happen to you. So just remember that and have a go.
And don't neglect that 1/3.
And don't neglect that 1/3.
Daen, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks for
Thanks
making
for
the
coming
time.
out.